All right, good afternoon. Apologies for the delay, the confusion, and everything else. In just a short while after we're done, we will be joined by the UN's chief economist, Elliot Harris, as well as Leila Fourie, the chief executive officer of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and co-chair of the Global Investors for Sustainable Development Alliance. They will be here to discuss their action plan to scale up the investments in sustainable development. The Secretary General spoke this morning to the Global Investors for Sustainable Development Alliance, and we will hear more from them. Also this morning, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, spoke virtually at the Green Climate Fund Private Investments for Climate Conference. She said we're entering a new era of climate disruption and we need all hands on deck on how to tackle this crisis. Ms. Mohammed said we must prioritize investments that contribute to low-carbon, climate-resilient recovery. She called on governments to set long-term vision by aligning their pandemic recovery plans with their national climate commitments. She also called on business to embed climate risk in their decision making and aligning their portfolios with the goals of the Paris Agreement and Sustainable Development Goals. Ms. Mohammed also noted that scaling up financing for adaptation and resilience will be essential to protect people and stressed that the work of the Green Climate Fund is needed now more than ever as we accelerate the decarbonization of the global economy. As you will have seen, a note was issued from our office, jointly by our office in Lebanon and the State Department representatives there, to say that representatives from the government of Israel, Lebanon, and the United States met on October 14th, that is today, to launch discussions aimed at reaching consensus on a common Israeli-Lebanon maritime boundary. The negotiations were mediated and facilitated by the U.S. team, led by Assistant Secretary of State David Schenker and Ambassador John DeRoche, and the discussions were hosted by the UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon, Jan Kubish. The Israeli delegation, and I can tell you that during this initial meeting, representatives held productive talks and reaffirmed their commitment to continue negotiations later this month. Those talks took place in Nakora, and the full statement is online. Turning to the situation between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and I can tell you that according to the World Health Organization, continued hostilities between Armenia and Azerbaijan will cause direct disruption to health care and further burden on health systems that are already stretched due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Both countries have seen recent increases in COVID-19 transmission. As of October 11th, Armenia's newly reported cases have doubled over the last 14 days. In Azerbaijan, cases have increased by approximately 80% over the past week. WHO stressed that COVID-19 does not respect borders or lines and that escalations in military conflict will create the environment for the virus to spread. This is yet another clear example of why the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire needs to be respected. I think, as he said often, as long as humans keep killing other humans, the only winner will be the COVID-19 virus. We once again call for the parties to respect the humanitarian ceasefire and engage with the Minsk Group co-chairs on meaningful discussions. The UN teams in Armenia and Azerbaijan continue supporting the COVID-19 response in both countries to save lives and livelihoods impacted by the pandemic. WHO is also expanding its operations to respond to increased health needs that and continued hostilities will inevitably occur. The UN mission in Mali tells us that they condemned 2 successive attacks on Malian armed forces in central Mali yesterday. The attacks by unidentified armed elements resulted in the deaths of at least 11 Malian soldiers and 12 civilians. The UN mission immediately deployed air assets to secure the area, while UN peacekeepers provided first aid to the wounded and evacuated the most critical cases by helicopter to the appropriate medical centers. We join our colleagues in Mali in sending our condolences to the Malian government as well as to the grieving families and wish a speedy recovery and complete recovery to those who were wounded. Turning to Libya, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says humanitarian partners are concerned about the fragile situation and a possible humanitarian disaster should the current escalations and mobilizations around Sirte lead to military operations. The lives of more than 125,000 people in and around Sirte remains of great risk. COVID-19 have increased exponentially across Libya, with 4,985 cases and 656 deaths confirmed as of yesterday. Health systems have been affected by the closure of health facilities due to a lack of resources and staff contracting COVID-19. In addition, fuel shortages and power cuts have affected the functioning of health services. A recent rapid survey carried out in Tripoli found that 92 primary health care facilities that were functioning before the pandemic, only 54 are still operational. And across the country, humanitarian organizations have reached nearly 268,000 people, two-thirds of the overall target, with humanitarian assistance since the beginning of the year. And in Myanmar, in a statement issued by the UN and our NGO partners on the ground, they expressed their sadness and shock concerning the killing of 2 children in fighting between Myanmar Army and the Arakan Army in Rakhine State on October 5th. The children were part of a group of local farmers allegedly forced to walk in front of a Myanmar Army unit to ensure a path clear of landmines. The 2 children died of gunshot wound after fighting broke out. You know, we read these stories. We talk about these cases every day. This is really quite shocking. The statement called for a full, transparent, and expedited investigation of the incident and for anyone responsible for the killing of the children to be held accountable. It also expressed deep concern over the alarming increase of reports of killings and injuries of children in Myanmar. More than 100 were killed or maimed in conflict during the first 3 months of 2020, accounting to more than half of the total number in 2019, and significantly surpassing the total number of child casualties in 2018. As Myanmar tackles the COVID-19 pandemic, we and our partners urge all parties to the conflict to intensify efforts to ensure that children are protected from all grave violations and to ensure access to humanitarian aid and exercise maximum restraint in the use of force where civilians are present. Quick update from the Dominican Republic, where our team there, led by resident coordinator Mauricio Ramirez Villegas, is doing to address the pandemic. UN agencies, together with non-governmental organizations, surveyed more than 6,300 households to gather data for the government on the pandemic's impact on employment, food security, and education. The survey results will support the government's recovery program to provide safety cushion to prevent people from sliding into poverty and boost the livelihoods of the most vulnerable. The UN and our partners are also helping to set up a health situation room and a public health intelligence center. Food aid has reached more than 90,000 vulnerable people, including children, pregnant women, older people, people with disabilities, and people living with HIV/AIDS. And a new report today released by our friends at WHO in Geneva shows that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries were making steady progress in tackling tuberculosis. There was a 9% reduction in incidence between 2015 and 2019, and a 14% drop in deaths in the same period. However, the report says that access to TB services remains a challenge. It also warns that global targets for prevention and treatment will likely be missed without urgent action and investments. WHO says the funding is a major issue, and in 2020, funding for TB prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and care reached $6.5 billion, representing only half of the $13 billion target agreed by world leaders and the UN political declaration on TB adopted in 2018. Disruption in services caused by COVID-19 pandemic have led to further setbacks. In many countries, human, financial, and other resources have been relocated from TB to COVID-19 response. According to the report, approximately 1.4 million people died from TB-related illnesses in 2019. I want to end on some good news and thank our friends in faraway Dili as they've paid their regular budget dues in full for Timor-Leste. Their payment takes us up to 126. Halas, Mr. Bays, and then Madame Celia.
I have 3 different questions, 3 different continents. First, tensions in Thailand, where there are protesters protesting the king, the UN's reaction.
our reaction to those protests, the reaction is protesting just about everywhere, is that people have a right to demonstrate freely, and it is important for security services to exercise restraint and to ensure that people have that right, and that right be respected.
Next question regarding Uganda. The main opposition politician, Bobi Wine, is reporting intimidation. Recently, his campaign headquarters was ransacked. As you're aware, he is probably the most serious challenger to President Museveni since he came to power in 1986. And some commentators are suggesting that the incumbent president doesn't particularly want him to run. What is your reaction given those important elections coming up next year?
Let me get you something on Uganda. I was expecting something I don't have, but I will get you something.
And last question, just an update for us. You'll remember during the General Assembly week, there was an offer from President Putin to vaccinate the UN staff. That's now some weeks ago. You were going to evaluate the offer and look into it. What now is your position?
I think those discussions are ongoing. For us, it's important that any vaccine be cleared by WHO, but discussions are ongoing. Madame Celia, please.
It's about Mali. It seems that the situation is getting worse with the killing of the Malian soldiers and the civilians. Do you think that it has to do with the release of the 200 prisoners?
Look, I'm not. I would never edit your question. I'm not in a position to give you a position on a clear link between the two incidents. We have seen, and not just since that release, but even before, is continued attacks on the Malian armed forces, continued attacks on the UN peacekeepers. So I'm not positioned to link the two. Let's go to the screen. If anybody has a question on video, just wave. Yes, Alan, please. Is that you? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Stéphane. Today, the Security Council is going to discuss situation in Colombia. And as far as I've seen in the report by the ESG, it stated that during the recent protests over there, 13 people, I guess, have been killed or died, and over 300 persons were injured. Regarding that, I have actually two questions. First, please, does the UN have any official statistics overall on how many people all over the world were killed or were injured during protests? And the second question, please, don't you find that the UN bodies, the ESG to some extent, pay more attention to protests in Belarus rather than some other places like, for example, Colombia or, I don't know, Haiti, in spite of the fact that just literally the number of deaths in Colombia is higher than in Belarus and the number of injuries is higher. Could you please comment on that? Thank you.
I think I'm not sure I agree with your analysis. I answer questions as they're asked. Whether or not reporters are paying more attention to Belarus than what's happening in Colombia is another issue. But if questions are asked, I answer. And then you will find that my answers are basically within the same principled parameters. Do we have, whether or not, I don't know, and I don't think we in the Secretariat have those kinds of numbers. You may want to check with our good colleagues at the UN Human Rights Office in Geneva, if they have those numbers. As for the situation in Colombia, as you said, the SRSG will be briefing the Security Council, so those remarks will be made available, and that will reflect the Secretary General's position. Ray.
Thank you, Stéphane. There are some media reports that mention Turkey is about to build a military base in Libya. It's like kind of foothold base in North Africa or that area of the Mediterranean. As UN, do you think that it's something good for the stability of the region, or is something bad for that country?
I have no information one way or another on this. Our position remains the same, is that I think all external parties, and there are quite a few who have different levels of involvement in the Libyan conflict, should work to ensure that the parties in Libya work cohesively towards a political agreement. And we announced a number of different talks, political, military talks, which was a really positive step in the right direction. And we hope that during those discussions, all those who have an influence on the parties will focus on making those talks a success, so that peace can return to Libya. I mean, I just read some pretty horrifying numbers on the humanitarian situation in that country, and I think that should all be kept in the forefront of the minds of all those who are involved in the Libyan conflict. Okay, Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. Yesterday, I asked Farhan about the situation of the Palestinian POW, Maher al-Akhras, who enters today his 80th day of hunger strike. If there is any language from Lebanon.
What I can tell you is that Mr. Mladenov, our special coordinator on the ground, is deeply concerned about the deteriorating condition of Maher al-Akhras, Palestinian being held in Kaplan Hospital, who began a hunger strike over 79 days to protest his administrative detention by Israeli authorities. The special coordinator reiterates his call for all those held under administrative detention to be either charged or released immediately. Okay.
Thank you so much. And I have another question. Today, Israel approved building 2,166 units, expanding current settlement or building a new settlement. Are you aware of this development?
I personally had not seen that report, but our position on settlements remains unchanged. Okay, any other questions? Yes, Ali Iftikhar, please, then we'll go to our guests.
Thank you, Stéphane. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Yesterday, Farhan gave a report about fighting in Afghanistan's Helmand province that has displaced thousands of people. Do you have any update, and what are the relief efforts that you are engaged in?
No, I do not have an update to what Farhan said yesterday, but we'll see what else we can get.
No.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are now delighted to turn to our guests, Elliot Harris, who you know well. Is our.
Steph, you missed two questions online.
I'm sorry, I'm having a problem with the chat, but who else had a question? I apologize.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Ben has a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Stefanski.
Ben, and then we'll go to Karina.
Thanks. Just go back to Israel region. Israeli NGO Regavim has claimed that the UN funds and has given its political support to the PA to illegally build in parts of Area C, in what they say is the area of Paduel in Samaria region. Do you have anything on this, or can you get me something on this, please?
I will try to get you something on this. If you could just email me some information, I'll look into it for you. Karina, please.
Hi, Stéphane. Thank you. I have a question on Kyrgyzstan. Is there any visits being planned or contacts being made in the recent days and days ahead?
Yes, there are contacts at various levels by UN entities, and I should have a bit more details on that later this afternoon for you. Signore Vacara, is that you?
Yes, thank you, Stéphane.
Go ahead.
My question is that about a week ago, I asked you if the Italian government had asked help to the UN, to the Secretary General, about the situation with the Sicilian fishermen, the Italian fishermen. They are still held in Libya by the, Haftar. You say last week that you didn't receive any request.
No, I had not, but
Okay.
I will check.
Yeah.
Okay.